Please welcome Michael Geer from the Pennsylvania Family Institute.
Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce a good friend of mine who I know you are going to enjoy hearing from. His name is Tim Goeglein, and if you were to look up the words kindness or kind or gracious in a dictionary, you would find Tim's picture there. Tim started out as a journalist, but then worked in the United States Senate for U.S. Senator Dan Coates, spent 10 years working for Senator Coates. Then he went to work for George W. Bush in the White House and served all 8 years in the Bush White House, and then subsequent to that was hired by an organization that I am very much familiar and connected with, Focus on the Family. He is vice president with Focus on the Family, has been there 10 years, and Tim and I also served together with an organization on a board called the Family Policy Alliance, which is a network of organizations like the Pennsylvania Family Institute across the country with a headquarters in Colorado Springs. Tim is going to have, I think, a very enlightening presentation to all of you. And as background for the presentation, in his work, both at Focus on the Family and prior to that at the White House and with Senator Coates, he has been involved in 8 United States Supreme Court nominations and confirmation processes. And you all know how contentious those can be and what lessons can be learned and the power of the judiciary. And that is part of what Tim is going to speak to us about here this afternoon. So please welcome Tim Goeglein.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is a pleasure to be with you. It is very rare that I am in the same building with my 3 favorite Pennsylvanians, Loman Henry, Colin Hanna, and Michael Geer. And may I say, after living and working in Washington for 30 years as a conservative, it is great to be in Pennsylvania. When I arrived in Pennsylvania today, I could smell freedom. And it's great to be back in the United States. I was asked yesterday, what has Washington become? And I said it is 68 square miles surrounded by reality. And so it's nice to be out of unreality and in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You all know that in Washington, if you're not at the table, you are on the menu. And it is extremely important in the topic that I'm going to discuss in my time with you today, that we think a lot about what I consider to be the largest domestic achievement of the Trump-Pence administration. As Democratic hopefuls continue to make headlines about their desire to expand and to pack the U.S. Supreme Court, President Trump's historic efforts to nominate and confirm conservative judges, I think, grows and grows with each passing day. Right now, and I know most of you are sitting down, this is a rather extraordinary data point. As of this morning, 1 out of every 5 judges, 20%, on the federal appeals courts were nominated and confirmed during President Trump's administration. That is absolutely breathtaking. And to date, the president has confirmed a total, I know you're still sitting down, he has nominated for confirmation a total of 91 federal judges, including 2 Supreme Court justices, and are you ready for this? A record-breaking 37 judges to the appellate courts, which of course decide the vast majority of legal cases in the United States. Now, those are impressive figures, especially when you consider that the President and the Senate were able to accomplish all of this in just over 2 years. By any measurement, against the last 5 presidencies, that is the highest watermark ever for the Supreme Court and federal judges, and that is worth applauding. And as I was driving here today from Washington, I was thinking to myself, why is this? I mean, in the real political and public policy realm, why this achievement in this administration? And I think it may have to do with the fact that the president has put forth a total of 173 nominees since taking office. And by the way, that in the judicial realm outpaces all 5 of his immediate predecessors, Presidents Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, H.W. Bush, and Ronald Reagan, all put together. And if the nominations keep coming at the same pace, it's looking more like a real possibility that the president will replace, are you ready for this? More than 1/3 of all federal judicial slots with conservative judges in his first term. That is breathtaking. So in sum, think about this. That's 1 of every 3 federal judges who would be committed to upholding the original plain text of the United States Constitution and who would thereby protect our religious liberty by applying the true meaning of the First Amendment. Now, that is not just great news. There's more great news. Are you ready for this? This is one of the youngest classes of federal judges in the history of the United States of America. And I want to give you an example. Earlier this month, the U.S. Senate voted and confirmed 3 of President Trump's nominees to fill appellate court vacancies. And Focus on the Family, in our work in Washington, is very involved in a very broad, wide, and deep coalition effort for district, appellate, and Supreme Court nominations. These 3, I think, are illustrative of the examples that I'm building. Allison Rush has, of course, now gone on to the 4th Circuit. Chad Redler has gone on to the 6th Circuit, and Eric Murphy to the 6th Circuit. But what is not evident at first sight is that these nominees are younger than you would actually expect. Judge Rushing, you're still sitting down, is 37 years old. And by the way, this makes her the youngest federal judge in the United States. Judges Murphy and Riedler, by the way, are not far behind, 39 and 40 years old, respectively. Overall, and this is the big data point, overall, the median age of the president's circuit court judges is now approximately 49 years old. That's slightly younger than the judges confirmed during the past 5 presidential administrations. This is all a fancy way of saying that actuarial, our fellow conservatives will be on the high bench for a long time. Now, because judges are confirmed and seated on the bench for life, a nominee's age is an important trait. That's because it's not uncommon that judges nominated in their late 30s or 40s could, in fact, be seated for the next 40 to 50 years. And the implications of this are vast, especially for our first freedom. With young conservative judges who will interpret the Constitution as originally written, it's likely that our federal courts will be staffed with jurists who will help safeguard religious liberty for the next half-century. That is an incredible legacy for a presidency that is but 2.5 years old. There's something else I've come to Pennsylvania to talk about with regard to federal judges, and that is the importance of what is called flipping the circuits. Recently, the U.S. Senate confirmed a jurist called Paul Matley to be a judge in the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the 3rd Circuit. And with that confirmation, President Trump has, for the first time in his presidency, flipped an appeals court to have a majority of conservative-minded judges. And here's why that is important for religious liberty. When deciding a case, appeals courts typically choose a 3-judge panel at random from its list of judges. So if the ratio of conservative to liberal appointed judges is closer to 50-50, then there's a higher probability that a conservative jurist will hear and rule on cases according to the original text of the Constitution. Remember, and this is really key, that a 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, overwhelmingly the most liberal circuit, issued that outrageous ruling that the high school coach, Joe Kennedy, did not have a constitutional right to privately pray on the field before a football game. If Coach Kennedy's appeal were heard today, there would be a greater chance of drawing a panel with at least 1 or 2 conservative judges on it. Can you imagine the difference that that could have made? And here's the good news. There's more of it. The Third Circuit may not be the only circuit to flip. We're seeing the margins improve in other circuits as well. For instance, in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, there are now a total of 29 judges' seats that are in contention, and liberal-appointed judges fill 16 of those seats. Conservative-appointed judges occupy 9 seats, and there are 4 vacancies. But when you look at the vacancies and the nominees whom President Trump has already put forward, which is 3 names that are pending before the Senate Judiciary Committee, what you find is that if all of them are confirmed, and I'm raising my right hand, I believe that all of them will be confirmed, we will then, on the most liberal circuit in the United States, have a conservative to liberal ratio 16 to 13. Yes, isn't that great? And finally, on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the most senior circuit. Remember, 4 of our sitting Supreme Court judges were first D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals judges. So the D.C. Circuit, which is often considered the second most important court after the Supreme Court, now enjoys, are you ready for this, a conservative majority thanks to recent confirmations of President Trump's appointed judges. That's huge. Yes. I want to say one other thing, if I may, in our time together on a related subject. You all know that just a few months ago, infamously, the governor of New York State, Andrew Cuomo, and the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia both defended, in no uncertain terms, infanticide. By the way, in the Beto-mania that we are all witnessing across the country, I hope you all have taken a look at what Beto O'Rourke said about infanticide just a few days ago. It did not get the attention that it deserved. It was a chilling defense of infanticide. And Focus on the Family had a meeting in Colorado Springs just about 8 weeks ago. And my colleagues and I said, what can we do to counter the defense of infanticide, not just around the country, but especially in Governor Cuomo's backyard? And I'm very pleased to say, providentially, that Focus on the Family has now leased the top 11 jumbotrons in Times Square, and the weekend before Mother's Day. By the way, please go online and take a look. It'll be on May 4th. I hope you all will come and bring your 10,000 best friends. On May 4th, Saturday, May 4th, we will show for all of the 350,000 people who visit Times Square every day, and everybody in our beloved country and the world, if they will take just a minute to watch. I'm very pleased and excited and eager to tell you all that Focus on the Family is going to show live a 3rd trimester ultrasound. And thank God for 4D technology. Praise God for 4D technology, because when across Times Square on May 4th, everybody looks up at that moment and sees, by the gift of 4D imagery of a 3rd trimester pregnancy, they will all say in unison, "It's a baby, it's a baby." And at that point, Governor Cuomo will have no more excuses. Your enthusiasm is duly noted. I want to mention one other thing, if I may, in my short time regarding our work at Focus on the Family and as it relates to all of you here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I, as Michael was so kind to say, for 10 years of my professional life, worked for U.S. Senator Dan Coats of Indiana, who in those years was overwhelmingly, with the likes of Senator Helms and a few others, the most highly regarded, categorically pro-life U.S. Senator. And then for the next nearly 8 years of my life, I was privileged to work at the White House for George W. Bush, another pro-life president. And in all of those years, there were a lot of us who were, fighting the good fight in the pro-life movement from the beginning. And all of us knew in the phrase, the famous phrase of Morton Blackwell, who is a friend to many in this room, I know, that in Washington, D.C., personnel is policy. I have come to Pennsylvania for the second time in one set of remarks to raise my right hand. In the history of Washington, D.C., in the judicial branch, in the legislative branch, in the executive branch, we have never, in the pro-life movement, had a more pro-life president and vice president. We have never had a more pro-life majority leader in the United States Senate. And may I say, we are getting ready to test the proposition in the next 2 terms about whether we will have one of the first major cases now brewing at the district and at the appellate levels to come actually to the Supreme Court by God's providence to begin to fully and successfully test the constitutionality of Roe against Wade. This is really big. And I think it is fair to say that all of us should be praying regularly for Justice Ginsburg's full restoration to health. We want her fully restored to good health. We wish her well, we wish her goodwill, and we also wish her to resign. There are waiting in the wings, demographically, the strongest bench of conservative jurists in the history of this country. We have a whole rising generation of young conservative men and women, many of them probably over the years who have been with all of you in these hallways. And they have been deeply influenced by the intellectual and the legal movements which were birthed by the late, great Robert Bork. Originalism, textualism, nourished, of course, by the late, great Justice Scalia, currently practiced by very noted jurists, not just on the Supreme Court, but in the appellate courts. And this intellectual ferment, which has taken approximately 40 years to be nourished, we are living through a remarkable period of time. And I think what is probable is that incrementally as conservatives, we have learned that to overturn a precedent of the magnitude of Doe v. Bolton and Roe against Wade, that it takes an enormous amount of time, it takes an enormous amount of energy, but it also takes an enormous amount of intellectual dynamism that floods across all of those decades into the DNA and into the marrow of those men and women who will eventually be nominated and confirmed at the federal level. And I don't want by any way to discount the very important Superior Court elections that will be coming up in your Commonwealth. All judicial elections are local. in this regard. And it's very important that in your Commonwealth that conservatives show up at the polls and put the right men and women, on the bench. But at the federal level, where I have spent a lot of my own professional life, I've been privileged to meet and to learn about so many of these remarkable young jurists and potential jurists. And jurisprudentially, on the question of Roe against Wade, on the question of religious liberty and the rights of conscience, they are ready to move forward and to take their place in American life. And I want to share with you, if I may, in closing, why I am particularly hopeful in this regard. I was privileged in my first week at the White House to attend a meeting. And the second person who I met in that meeting was a young fellow conservative called Brett Kavanaugh. And, we conservatives find one another, don't we? Yes, we do. And we became very fast friends. And our friendship has widened and deepened and grown through the years. And it's very tempting to stand here today and to say, this is the smartest person I've ever met, or this is one of the finest constitutionalists I've ever met. Those temptations are certainly there. But the most important thing, and I'm eager to close on this note in a room of fellow conservatives, that the most important thing is the central thing of American conservatism, that character is destiny and that character matters. And I'm very happy to say that in addition to this remarkable bench of talented jurists that we have, in our conservative movement, the most important thing to say is that in addition to all of those gifts, these are remarkable men and women of unquestioned character and integrity. I remember when William F. Buckley famously said, and you remember this too, that he would rather be governed by the first 2,000 names in the Boston telephone directory than the entire faculty of Harvard. Well, I'm very happy to say that Harvard Law School has given us, quite against what you might imagine, some of the most remarkable, talented, and young conservative constitutionalists who have gone now onto the highest court in the land. So I close my remarks today in your great gathering to say that it's an honor and a privilege and a delight to come with unquenchable optimism to Pennsylvania and to categorically say that it is a rising sun for all that we believe on the federal judiciary and how that relates to the panoply of issues regarding marriage, family, parenting, conscience, and religious liberty. We need to be completely optimistic and hopeful, and to know that, as Solzhenitsyn said, that one word of truth will outweigh the world. God bless, and be of good cheer.